Why is Australia so strangely empty? Why haven't we discovered so much of the ocean? Is our planet a perfect sphere? And was the Earth once more purple than green? I bet you didn't know these facts about our planet, so let's find it all out. Australia is really massive. To make it easy to understand its size, it's nearly as large as the entirety of Europe. Home to around 26 million people, Australia is among the countries with the least population per area. It's ranked only 55th for the highest population in the world, while it has the 6th largest land area. Why is so much of it empty? A good guess would be the many dangerous animals hiding behind every rock. At least this is enough for me to avoid Australia. But there's one specific reason to explain this. The dryness of Australia ensures that 85% of the population lives within 30 miles of the coast, and 80% of them live along the eastern side where rainfall is more common. But although there is an overall lack of rainfall, only 20% of Australia is unlivable desert, and only 40% is considered not habitable by human standards. The water consumption is actually higher than their average rainfall each year, but there is a further ancient water source hidden way below, which can support a much larger population. It's one of the largest underground freshwater resources in the world, the Great Artesian Basin. It covers a staggering 656,000 square miles, which is 1/5 the size of Australia. It holds enough water to cover the Earth under a 1.5 feet deep layer of water. Or, more usefully, it could provide enough water for thirsty Australians over the next 1,500 years. Only 6.5% of Australia has soil suitable for farming, so this doesn't seem like a huge amount. But in case you forgot, Australia is big, and this small percentage is about the size of France. With this massive area available for farming, Australia has more than enough to feed its population, with a further 70% of agriculture products that are exported overseas. So, with plenty of land, food, and water, why are the population figures so low? A very slow migration process is the reason. First, only people from the United Kingdom lived there. Then, they opened their borders to other Europeans, and this restriction remained in place until 1973. You would think almost 200 years would be enough time for a lot of people to migrate, but Australia was just so far away. The risk of traveling such a long way and the cost of the journey meant that people from Europe prefer the shorter and cheaper options to migrate elsewhere, like Canada or the USA. For the past 2,000 years, people have understood that Earth is round. But did you know that it's not a perfect sphere? Through the wobbly rotation of Earth, our planet constantly changes its size, very slowly of course. The North and South poles are surprisingly flat. Earth is pretty much like a ball being squished. Imagine there's a giant hand with the fingers pressing at both poles. Because of this pressure, the equator pushes a little outwards. Along with an uneven gravitational field, Earth has loads of gravity glitches, some positive and others negative, creating an uneven, rocky, and bumpy surface. Some places on Earth have more gravity than others. If you weighed yourself along the equator, you would weigh 0.5% less than at the poles. Not a whole lot, and definitely not worth the trip to change your weight. If you were to measure the length from the center of the Earth towards the furthest point of Earth, you would be shocked that Mount Everest isn't at the end of it. Instead, it's along the equator, which is the pushed out part. Ecuador's mountain Chimborazo would actually be the tallest point on Earth, as it's the furthest from the center. We still have around 80% of the ocean to map, which is crazy considering how much of the solar system we've explored in comparison. But we're still aware of many of the unbelievable details about the ocean. It covers over 80% of the world's surface, where 94% of the Earth's wildlife lives. And from some of the life in it, up to 80% of the world's oxygen is produced mainly from plankton, algae, and bacteria. One of the most famous, already mapped places is the Mariana Trench. It's the deepest point on Earth, as low as almost 7 miles deep. That's a huge, 5 times the length of the Grand Canyon, and deeper than Mount Everest is tall. It's also home to one of the most ancient seabeds on Earth, casually laying low for about 180 million years. The pressure at the bottom is over 1,000 bars, but although this is 1,000 times more than normal pressure, life still flourishes here. Throughout the ocean, there is an estimated over 3 million shipwrecks lying in the murky depths. Countless artifacts sit there untouched, and there could be more than all the world's museums. The mid-ocean ridge is the longest in the world, reaching 40,000 miles. That's almost 10 times the size of the Andes, the longest mountain range on land. The sun is the reason behind the blue and aqua colors of the ocean. This color isn't from the reflection of the sky, though they are both blue for the same reason. The surface of our planet receives white light from the sun, and it absorbs the orange, red, and yellow light stronger. It doesn't absorb the blue light so much, so it returns to how we see it. Of course, this only occurs based on how pure the water is. If the water is full of mud or algae, they scatter the light and overpower the water's natural blueness. There are many factors that determine what color we see on our planet. Could you believe that the Earth was green before? Instead, it was purple. Chlorophyll in our atmosphere absorbs mainly blue and red wavelengths from the sun and reflects the green ones to what we see our planet as today. Long ago, ancient microbes called retinal dominated the Earth instead of chlorophyll. They absorbed green light and reflected red and violet light. Those microbes had a simpler structure, so they were easier to produce in the low oxygen environment of the early Earth. They provided our planet with a purplish color instead of green. But chlorophyll is more efficient, and as the Earth was developing, it eventually took over. Imagine that billions of years ago, faraway observers could see our home as a small purple dot. I wonder if we could have also been purple. Probably not. The biggest tree on Earth is a giant sequoia named General Sherman. It stands over 280 feet, almost reaching the height of a 26-story building. They believe it to be 2,700 years old, with a circumference of 1,000 inches. Its weight is a staggering 1,800 tons. That's heavy, but it isn't the heaviest living thing on Earth. In Utah, a huge grove of trees called Pando works like a single colony of trees. The massive root system connects all of them together with up to 47,000 stems. It weighs up to 6,000 tons and is 80,000 years old. It makes it the oldest living thing known to humans. Now, what about the biggest area of one being? Off the coast of Western Australia, a seaweed grows to an unthinkable size. The Poseidon's ribbon weed has been growing for 4,500 years, spreading underground clone shoots. It's all connected and shares the same DNA with most of its shoots. It covers a massive 77 square miles, the same size as 28,000 soccer fields, or the size of Nebraska. And it won't stop there either, as it continues to grow by 2 feet each year. It's hard to even picture the scale of these enormous beings. Now, just imagine if they were all purple. New Zealand is a hidden gem in terms of size and climate. It's like the Clark Kent of countries, bigger than you think, and with some serious superpowers. Let's take a closer look at the map. You see those two islands? They may have simple names, but they're actually giants in disguise. The North Island and South Island are the 14th and 12th largest islands in the world. Who would have thought New Zealand was hiding such big secrets? And speaking of size, New Zealand is even bigger than the UK. That's right, it takes the 75th place on the chart of countries by area. Bonus, the climate is still perfect for any human out there. No dry season, warm summers, and mild winters. It's like the country was designed by Goldilocks herself. With all those perks, you'd think millions of people would be flocking to New Zealand. Like the UK is cool, and there is a lot of people, about 68 million people. And in New Zealand, which is also cool, just slightly above 5 million. Wait, hold on a sec. Let me double check. Seems like I've lost a zero somewhere. Nope, I was right. There are 5.2 million people living in New Zealand. Hold up a minute. How on earth is this even possible? New Zealanders got it all. The perfect setting, the ideal weather, And they can even crash in a hobbit hole if that's their thing. And the craziest part is they can use hobbit money to actually pay. I kid you not. New Zealand is the only country in the world that can legally use hobbit coins as currency. These coins feature characters like Bilbo Baggins and Gandalf and are totally legit. Although, let's be real, their face value won't get you very far. The most expensive one is made of pure gold and costs a whopping 3,695 New Zealand dollars, which is slightly more than 2,000 in US dollars. But it only has a face value of 10 New Zealand dollars, which is just $6. So dudes who are into Tolkien with some extra cash to burn, New Zealand might be your next vacation spot. New Zealand sounds fun, huh? But wait, where are all the people at? It's like a ghost town up in here. Let's take a closer look at why this place is so sparsely populated. According to some sources, a whopping 80% of the country is empty. That's right, you could probably shout your deepest secrets into the void and no one would hear you. Now let's break it down with some fancy schmancy pie charts. As it turns out, only 23% of the population lives in the South Island, while a whopping 77% reside in the North Island. And get this, even though the North Island is smaller, it's where all the cool kids are hanging out. Speaking of cool kids, about 37% of New Zealanders live in Auckland. Yeah, you heard that right. Not even the capital city can compete with Auckland's popularity. Wellington is the capital, and it only has about 200,000 people living there. I mean, come on, even Alaska has more people than that. So, the South Island of the country is basically in the middle of nowhere. It's like a ghost town, but with mountains and more sheep than you can count. Seriously, the sheep outnumber the people by a long shot. The country's main industry is agriculture, especially sheep farming. Fun fact, for every Kiwi, there are at least 10 sheep. Huh? Seems like we've got the first answer. New Zealand is like the Alaska of the world. Nah, it's not that cold, but it's definitely isolated. New Zealand is located in the South Pacific and is far away from other countries. Did you know that New Zealand is so remote that it's considered the world's most isolated landmass? Yep, it's situated in the Southern Oceans, far away from any other major landmass. No wonder it took so long for people to settle there. But even though it's far away, New Zealand's closest neighbor is Australia, which is still over 1,000 miles away. And if you're thinking of flying there, be prepared for a long and expensive journey. Since New Zealand is a small country with only a few airports and airlines, there's not much competition when it comes to flights. This means that airlines can charge a pretty penny for those tickets. But don't worry, there's a silver lining. The lack of competition means that airlines have to adjust their flight availability and capacity to meet customer demand. So while the airfare rates may be high, at least you'll have plenty of options for when to travel. Let's go back to New Zealand's sparseness. A whopping 30% of the country is actually a national reserve. That's like having a third of your backyard declared as a protected area. No wonder New Zealand is known for its stunning green hills and forests that are filled with all sorts of plants and wildlife. From Mount Cook to Milford Sound, Tongariro and Coromandel, this country is truly a natural paradise. And you know what's even cooler? The people of New Zealand are super eco-conscious, which is probably why they've made such an effort to protect their natural wonders. It's like they're saying, hey, we want to enjoy this beautiful land for generations to come, so let's take care of it. That's a cool philosophy. Don't expect too much action here. There's not a whole lot going on. Tourism is a big deal, but most visitors are just passing through or on a working holiday. Can you blame them though? The scenery is straight up breathtaking. Alright, what about its population? Still no answer. Right, New Zealand's land area is smaller than Colorado, and there are only around 5 million people living there. And the climate's pretty chill. So what's the problem? Well, there are pitfalls. This place can get pretty wild with earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, floods, and storms. But if you're up for a challenge, living in New Zealand might be just the thing for you. Just make sure you pack your earthquake kit and raincoat. Even though it's not freezing cold like in Alaska, there's still a problem with getting warm during winter months. The houses in New Zealand are about as insulated as a cardboard box, and energy prices are through the roof. So, when winter rolls around, it's basically like living in an igloo. No wonder people don't want to stick around. Also, getting to these igloos can be a real challenge. Just take a look at Dunedin, the second largest city in the South Island of New Zealand. It's home to the steepest road in the world. According to the Guinness Book of Records, Baldwin Street has a slope of 19 degrees, making it a real thigh burner for those who dare to climb it. There's a fun annual event held in this street. During the Cadbury Jaffa race, thousands of chocolate balls are rolled down Baldwin Street for charity. As for living at the top of this street, well, let's just say you'll have steel muscles and a great view. But if you're feeling lazy, maybe invest in a ski lift. Just kidding, there's no ski lift. But wouldn't that be cool? Did you know that the town with the longest name in the world is in New Zealand? It's called... Yeah, you saw that. Please don't make me pronounce it. And no one smashed a keyboard to come up with that. Hey, and what if there are so few people in New Zealand just because it's hard to pronounce some toponyms? The town is located on the east coast of New Zealand, and its Maori translation is quite interesting. It means the place where Tamatea, the man with the big knees who slid, climbed, and swallowed mountains, known as the Land Eater, played his flute to his loved ones. Now that's a mouthful. Luckily for locals, they simply refer to it as Tamata Hill. However, if you're planning on visiting, keep in mind that it's on private land and permission is required before you can walk to it.
Imagine you decided to take a road trip the old-fashioned way. And by that I mean you decide to do it without the help of any technology. What? So you go to the nearest convenience store and buy a map of each state you plan to pass through. You buckle them up on the passenger seat right next to you and set off on your adventure. During your first week, you arrive in the state of New York. You wave bye-bye to Lady Liberty, eat a slice of pizza, and head upstate. Near the Catskills, you notice you're running low on gas and decide to stop in the nearest town to fill up your tank. You check your map, and it appears that the nearest place is a small village called Agloe, right at the next intersection. You drive a few minutes and pass through a sign that says, "Welcome to Agloe, home of the Agloe General Store." Well, this must be it, you think to yourself. But the town is strangely empty. You can't find the store or the gas station you were looking for. There are no houses. You start to think there might be a mistake. Agloe doesn't seem to exist. This story may sound made up, but it could have actually happened to anyone passing through New York a few years ago. Actually, the so-called town of Agloe is what is called a phantom settlement or a paper town. There are several of these around the world, but Agloe is probably the most famous. Paper towns are basically fake towns. That is, they don't really exist. They're made up of Easter eggs put there by map makers as a kind of copyright trap. Maps are tough to make. To create a map from scratch, one has to do years of fieldwork or analysis of satellite photos. That's why plagiarism has always been rampant among map makers. It's pretty easy to redraw the same geographical features from one map onto a new map, and it is hard to get caught. People are, after all, drawing the exact same world. That's why map makers came up with a way to catch individuals stealing their data. Some map makers may include a mountain that is bigger than they are in reality. Others might add a slight turn on a road, where in reality there is none. For example, in the early 1970s, a fake mountain peak appeared on some Boulder County maps. The addition of this previously unknown peak, called Mount Richard, into local maps began to confuse Colorado rock climbers at the time. It turned out that Mount Richard was one of these copyright traps, put there by a local mapsman called Richard Ciacci. Let's just say he must have decided to pay a tribute to himself with this little addition. Now, adding a paper town is perhaps one of the most extreme solutions, one that mapmakers hope goes unnoticed. But that's not what usually happens, which leads us back to the Agloe story. Mapmakers Ernest Alpertz and Otto Lindbergh from the CDG, General Drafting Corporation, were part of the largest map publishers of the 1930s. Back then, the company was commissioned to create a map of the state of New York. That's when the two men had an idea. In order to prevent copyright infringement, they would create a phantom settlement combining parts of their names together. They came up with the strange name Agloe and added the fake town along Route 206 near the water reservoir of Catskills in upstate New York. The area was supposed to be, in reality, a dirt road. Years later, Rand McNally, another map designing company, produced a map of New York that included a town called Agloe in the same location where CDG had originally placed it. Lindbergh was convinced that he had a copyright case against his competitor, but the story just kept getting more complicated. Both companies went to settle the case in court, but as it turned out, McNally had a legitimate reason for adding Agloe to their version of a New York map. You see, in order to fabricate their maps, McNally did a thorough research on real estate and establishments located in each existing town. And as it turned out, Agloe was not an empty town when they drew their map. Records show that the town housed an establishment named Agloe General Store. Sure, it was the only building in town, but that was enough for the mapmakers to believe that such a town really existed. They added Agloe to the map like they would add any other town with physical establishments. It seemed they weren't infringing any copyright if this once phantom settlement had somehow come to life. The plot twist is that CDG's Alpers and Lindbergh could never have foreseen that someone would decide to occupy a made-up town. But it happened. One day, someone bought a map from a regional gas station that had Agloe marked on it. The person wanted to open a store more or less where Agloe existed, so they decided to name the store after the town it was in. They trusted the accuracy of the map they bought and named their business Agloe General Store. After all, why would there be a non-existent town on an official map? The general store didn't last many years, only enough to turn this story into a mess. On the bright side, this whole debacle turned Agloe into a super famous fictitious settlement. It became a tourist spot, with people driving from all over the U.S. to get a picture of the town's welcome sign. Now, as we said before, paper towns are plenty around the world and over time, too. A 2005 BBC documentary revealed that the City of London alone had over 100 tiny fake streets or paper streets around the city. For instance, the so-called Moat Lane is supposedly a curving road in Finchley, North London. But if you ever decide to go visit, you'll find nothing but trees and gardens. And what about Argleton, a town in the north of England? Or, more accurately, an empty field in northeastern England. Argleton existed for a while on Google Maps. There were hotel listings and apartments for rent in town. Well, the only thing is that they weren't really in Argleton, but rather in nearby settlements. It's believed that Google Maps imported these fake streets into its database as they used renowned copyrighted atlases as their sources. But as the truth about these paper streets surfaced, the company later deleted them. If we turn back the clock a few hundred years, we'll find another mystery story involving a possible phantom settlement. But this isn't a tiny town at an intersection, but rather an entire island. Bermejo Island was speculated to be a tiny inhabited island. It appeared on many maps of the 16th and 17th centuries and was a hot spot for Spanish explorers. Its location sometimes varied slightly from map to map, and occasionally its name appeared as Bermeja, but its existence seems certain enough. It wasn't until the 18th century that the island stopped being depicted in maps altogether. This island's last appearance dates back to a 1921 edition of a Mexican atlas, and then, poof, it dropped out of the horizon altogether. The case of Mexico's disappeared island has raised many questions. Did it sink? Was it destroyed? Are people simply looking for it in the wrong place? 3 official investigations took place in 2009 to locate the island. They used high-end technologies, scouring Mexico's oceans and seabeds. Yet, Bermeja remained nowhere to be found. One can't help but wonder if the island ever existed at all. Similar to modern-day mapmakers, 16th and 17th century mapmakers had their way to trick map users. Instead of copyright traps, these fake towns or even fake islands served as a way to fool and confuse enemies and unwanted voyagers. Since a long time has gone by, it's hard to know whether Bermeja was just another phantom settlement. It stopped being depicted on maps, but this mysterious case still leaves people baffled and confused.